Here's a question for you. Have you thought about why Ryanair flights are so cheap? Yes, they use low cost airports, fly at odd times, literally charge you for everything. And all of that is true, but to maintain ticket prices at ridiculously low levels takes a brutal approach to cost cutting. There's an argument to be made that Ryanair has maybe gone a little bit too far with the way it's approached cost cutting, and it's somehow started to exploit its own cabin crew for profits. The company has clearly taken the approach of thinking about their staff as their biggest expense rather than an asset. And these are not my words. This is something the CEO, Michael O'Leary, himself has said in a whole article dedicated to his famous quotes. Before I get into it, just to get the legal stuff out of the way, this is all publicly available information. This is to say, please don't sue me, Michael. I mean, I have like 16 subscribers, so you're not gonna get much out of it anyways. Ryanair is so notorious for its treatment and management of employees that Daryl Hughes, their chief people officer, actually wrote a letter to the Work and Pensions Committee about their conditions. Apparently, cabin crew have to pay for their uniform. They're charged £25 every single month, supposedly to protect against someone leaving sooner. But surely you should just charge them if they choose to leave, rather than make them sacrifice their pay. A uniform is essential for them to be able to do their jobs as employees. It doesn't make any sense at all to be charging them money for it. Another example of Ryanair charging its own cabin crew is the mandatory training that the company requires before you can actually join. The letter I mentioned earlier points out that these courses are available in the range from 2,000 to 3,000 euros. And these are mandatory courses you need before you're allowed to join as cabin crew. So this means you're paying up to 3,000 euros for a mandatory training course and then charge £25 for your uniform every single month. But to say one nice thing about Ryanair in this entire video is that the course is now actually free, although you still have to pay around 700 euros for accommodation. But the charges don't stop there. Cabin crew have to pay full price for sandwiches and water on board. It got so bad that Spain, the country of Spain, actually asked Ryanair to stop charging their cabin crew for water. I mean, you can rip me off, Michael, but at least spare your staff. The other thing I want to talk about is how Ryanair employees are under extreme pressure. And the reason for this is because a lot of them are actually secretly salespeople. And just to explain that a little bit more, Ryanair as a business relies quite significantly on ancillary revenue. And what that means is, on top of charging money for the flights itself, Ryanair will also make money from the sales of sandwiches, water, and lottery cards on board. This is why they charge you £10.50 for a sandwich that looks like this. And because the company is so reliant on making money this way, it actually encourages its cabin crew to make sales. The crew are also paid commission on every sale they make. So conceptually, it sounds great. As an investor, you know that every single cabin crew member is not only keeping people safe, they're also selling product that you rely on as ancillary revenue. And then as a cabin crew member, you're encouraged to sell products because you get commissions from them. There are two reasons as to why this has actually not been working and why it contributes to my case of potential exploitation of cabin crew. The first reason is that Ryanair is very aggressive with setting sales targets for its staff. A 6-year-old crew assessment form used to grade cabin crew on their performance featured 7 grades for compliance, but 13 for boosting sales. This is so terrible. You sign up to be a cabin crew member only for them to assess you as salespeople in the sky. Some stories also talked about how if you as cabin crew missed your sales targets, then you could be looking at a worse work schedule, at potential demotions, and other disciplinary hearings. The most horrifying example of this was when a cabin crew member applied to move closer to her sick grandmother, but was denied the reallocation because she wasn't hitting her sales targets. But in all fairness to Ryanair, the source of this is The Sun, and if you're in the UK, you know they aren't exactly the best source of information. Arguably the worst out of all of these is how Ryanair is using creative employment contracts. Before I get into that though, I had to read a lot of UK employment law for this. It was extremely painful. So I'd really appreciate if you shared the video, liked the video, and subscribed. It really helps the channel out. But back to the shady contractuals. Most Ryanair cabin crew aren't actually employed by Ryanair at all. Normally, if you need people, you can hire them directly and then they work for you. This means you get labor and they get benefits like paid holiday, health insurance, worker protection, etc. But this is Michael we're talking about. Ryanair uses agency contracts, which basically means employing someone to work for you, but via a third party. And the reason they do this is so that they can get away with giving their cabin crew basically no benefits. And when I say benefits, that includes things like paid holiday. In the letter I was talking about earlier, they mentioned that the majority of their junior staff are agency contractors. That means that they're not getting the same benefits as people employed directly by Ryanair. Annoyingly, Ryanair doesn't disclose how many of their cabin crew are actually agency contractors. Ryanair has also historically been very anti-union, although recently they're talking to unions more and more. I guess that's the second nice thing I've said about them this video. Unions will negotiate on behalf of the workers and ensure really good working conditions. And while Ryanair does recognize these unions, it's extremely tough when it comes to negotiating with them. For example, Ryanair has threatened to close bases down just so it can make negotiations go faster with these unions. And at this point, we've been talking about potential cabin crew exploitation without necessarily talking about a baseline. So, what is life like in another airline, maybe a more premium airline like Emirates or Qatar? As a very, very quick summary, you would not be paying for your uniform in these airlines. In fact, some of them will throw in free dry cleaning. There's very, very little chance of you having stringent sales targets because these airlines aren't reliant on sandwich revenue. You're also less likely to end up with an agency contract as a junior staff, so you can actually take vacation days which are paid. And of course, you don't have to pay up to 3,000 euros for your training. You might be asking yourself, why does anyone work at Ryanair if that's the case? And the answer is actually quite simple. Just like Ryanair has made travel more accessible for the consumer, it's also made aviation more accessible to its cabin crew. A lot of the cabin crew jobs don't require a whole lot of aviation experience, so people will join Ryanair hoping to then build that experience and then move on to maybe a more premium airline. And before companies like Ryanair or EasyJet, it would have been significantly harder to break into the aviation industry as cabin crew. So I guess that's the third nice thing I've said about this company. Now let's talk about the man behind it all, Michael O'Leary. So I'm going to do a very, very quick segment on Michael O'Leary fun facts. He denied climate change was a real thing, very concerning for an airline CEO, called for extra security and profiling on Muslim men, bought a taxi number plate for his Mercedes S-Class so he could use the taxi lanes in Dublin instead of waiting in traffic, asked for striking cabin crew to be punished and take away their benefits. And honestly, that's probably not even the worst 5 things that this man has done. Just do a little bit of digging and read the Guardian article I'll link in the description. But I don't think leaders like him are solely the ones to blame for cabin crew exploitation that's happening in low-cost airlines. The problem is the way these ultra-low-cost airlines actually work as a business. Their entire competitive advantage, especially in the short-haul transport space, hinges on the fact that it can get you the cheapest possible price. And the way it can get you that cheap price is if its own costs are literally as low as possible. If Ryanair was actually to work with unions, offer all of their contractors an actual full-time contract with benefits, then it would get priced out by EasyJet. All of the customers that used to fly with Ryanair would now start taking EasyJet flights just because they're cheaper. So the business model is set up in a way where not only are you not going to improve your worker conditions, you're actually going to look for a way to lower them even more just so you can offer even cheaper prices. I guess the only solution is to fly British Airways.